Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with the British ambassador to Zimbabwe, Melanie Robinson. Enjoy this informative conversation. Melanie Robinson, British ambassador to Zimbabwe. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here.
So we've been meaning to do this for quite some time, and I'm glad that finally we do have an opportune moment to do that. Melanie, I was looking at your bio, and you started at the World, you were at the World Bank 2015 to 2018 as the director for the UK, and then you went to DFID and headed the office there in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, from 2012 to 2015. And when I looked at your bio, just when you announced the appointment of your announcement was made, I said to myself, this is just the person Zimbabwe needs from the UK to come and fix Zimbabwe. Speak to me about what went through your mind when the announcement was made that you'd be the UK's ambassador to Zimbabwe.
Well, firstly, Trevor, thank you. But I have a healthy respect for Zimbabwe, and of course, only Zimbabwe can fix Zimbabwe. So I looked at the appointment with I think the appropriate amount of humility. But I was delighted to get the job. I spent the last 20 years working in and on Africa. And I first visited Zimbabwe in 1995. I actually came here as a backpacker. The first time I came to Harare, I stayed in Mbari, went to the market and ate a mapani worms. And I've been wanting to come back to the country ever since. So it was really a fantastic job from my point of view. And as I went through the interview process, things were happening in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
And we know what happened in November that year. And I think, like many people, I came into the job in January 2019 with a high level of optimism and hope, and a real commitment and desire to help Zimbabwe succeed, to get on that pathway to a more peaceful, prosperous and democratic future. So I came with I think a spring in my step, I can say.
Mm-hmm. And talk to me about your expectations. And did you have a work plan which was then torpedoed by what happened in terms of the coup and then the elections that took place thereafter?
Well, you'll know, Trevor, that the UK at the time when Mnangagwa took over, the UK really felt that if he could deliver on his commitments, his promises to political and economic reform, it would be so important for the future of Zimbabwe that we should do everything we could to help him succeed in that. And we were criticised a bit at the time by some people for being enthusiastic supporters of that reform process, not of the individuals, not of the party, but of the reform process. And I think that was the right thing, because, as I say, they were incredibly significant reforms. I think that what has happened since then has disappointed not just the UK, but many Zimbabweans. We would have loved to see progress on reforms be more meaningful, more deep, faster. Of course, there has been progress, but just not at the depth and seriousness that many of us would have liked to see. And we have seen these ongoing human rights violations, which harm ordinary Zimbabweans. And so, 3 years later, there is a level of disappointment, but, still encouragement, hope, desire to see Zimbabwe get on that pathway. The ball is in the court of the Zimbabwean government, but the UK stands ready to respond if they can make the progress we all so dearly want to see.
Let's drill down, Melanie, on the disappointments. Could you be specific in terms of those disappointments in the first instance? And I would love to hear the signs of encouragement that you see on the horizon.
Well, first, let me talk about, the positive signs that we have seen in the last 3 years, because I think it's unfair not to recognise that there have been the odd bits and pieces that you can look at and say, okay, well, that was progress, or that was symbolically important. And, you know, things like getting rid of draconian laws of the past, like POSA and IPA, were important. I think the initial signal that they wanted to open up media space was important. The elections themselves were freer and fairer than any we've seen in Zimbabwe in recent history. So there have been the odd sign. But if I were to go, sorry, on sign, I should also mention the economic side. I think the initial period of economic reform, when the government was signed up to reforms which would then be monitored by the IMF, there were some initial signs, and indeed the auction that we have now is encouraging. However, and it's a big however, those small signs haven't really turned into a change of direction. They've been little lights and glimmers of hope, but they haven't been a change of direction down that pathway to meaningful reform that we would like to have seen. If I take the economic side, unfortunately, the reform program got derailed. There was a large payment to a politically connected individual and other quasi-fiscal printing, if you like, from the RBZ. When it comes to POSA, of course, it was replaced by a security law that, in the way it's being used, has continued to be fairly repressive. And then on, you know, IPA, an area that touches your industry, you know, the recent licenses have not necessarily gone to the most independent of actors. So time and again, we see that there's a spoken intention and then some signals, but really at its core, we've continued to see a government where we have had human rights violated, a lack of accountability, closed political space, the use of repressive techniques, an economy where corruption, unfortunately, is still far too rampant, and we aren't seeing that economic management, which would really get Zimbabwe's economy firing again and people's jobs moving and things moving forward.
So tell me, behind the scenes, do you make those points to the people that matter? And if you do, what kind of responses are you getting?
Yes, absolutely do. And this is, you know, right at the top. A little over a year ago now, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sent an envoy from London to come and talk to the president about our concerns as a friend, to say, look, we want to see you implementing your reform measures. We are worried about the progress. You know, that for the future of Zimbabwe, we'd like to encourage you to make more progress. And similarly, of course, I had regular meetings. I had regular meetings with Honourable Minister S.B. Moyo, who tragically passed away so suddenly and so recently. But we would have, my last meeting with him lasted 3 hours, and we would debate and discuss at length. And I think the response we often got was, you're not recognising the progress that we've made. And to that I always say, no, I do, and I do publicly. But it's just that progress is not in the deeper, more meaningful, more significant places. And there, you know, you see some acknowledgement of where things are, and even that things have moved slower than you might want. Sometimes the response is, look, change is hard. And of course it is. Of course it is. And there are interests, there are vested interests, and it is hard to tackle those. But that's why you have to show seriousness of intent, and you have to be willing to really drive that different direction through. And that's where we have seen that intent, that will, that real drive so far to be at a far lower level than we would like to have seen.
Before we get on to the UK Zimbabwe autonomous sanctions regime that you announced, that was announced this week, please help us understand the sanctions regime that was there. Am I correct that you were part of the EU sanctions regime, and what did that entail?
Yes, well, until we left the EU, and on December the 31st, we came out of that transition period. Yes, we were part of the EU restrictive measures, and that those are a set of measures that the EU, by unanimity, decides on. And those measures were targeted sanctions against some individuals over a course of years, and those were travel bans and asset freezes for those individuals, as well as an arms embargo and sanctions against Zimbabwe defence industries, basically preventing European companies from selling, again, defence equipment, arms to that company. And I would say that at the point where we left on the 31st of December, it's little known, but the number of people under active Zimbabwe, under active sanctions or restrictive measures from the EU was exactly 0. So there were people on the suspended list, and of course, former President Robert Mugabe was no longer on the list following his passing. So it was just an arms embargo and ZDI. And on the 1st of January, those two, the arms embargo and the ZDI restrictive measures, rolled over, if you like, into British law. They were copied and pasted together with a lot of legislation, a huge amount of legislation that was copied from European law into British law on the 1st of January.
Am I right then that one gets the sense that what happened at the beginning of January was you've run out of patience, there's a rupture in the relationship, because this is a huge and significant measure that you've taken. Have you been frustrated? All doors are open as far as negotiations are concerned?
Well, perhaps, Trevor, if I can just take the moment to sort of say what happened in January, because I'm sure many of your viewers will know, but just to be clear, in addition then to the arms embargo and the ZDI measures, what the UK announced this week, our Foreign Secretary said that there would be targeted measures, that's again, visa, travel ban, and asset freezes for 4 individuals from the security services who are deemed responsible for the violence in August 2018 and January 2019, and the disproportionate use of force that was found by the independent commissions. So those 4 came under travel bans and asset freezes. And yeah, why in January? Mm-hmm. Well, it's, or the end of January, I could say, it's 2 years since the violence in January 2019, more than 2 years since the violence in August 2018. As I say, in both cases, independent commissions found that there was excessive and disproportionate use of force, acting against Zimbabwe's own constitution and people's rights as enshrined in that constitution. And the president did commit to accountability. He committed to implement the recommendation of the Montellante Commission. But more than 2 years later, we have not seen any accountability. No one has yet been held to account for that excessive and disproportionate use of force in which 6 and then 17 Zimbabweans lost their lives. And so in our view, it was time for us to set out clearly that from the UK's point of view, those people need to be held to account. And we have put them under measures for that reason. Now, I would say, Trevor, that this is not a rupture. I think you used that term. Yeah. It is not shutting the door on Zimbabwe. We still want to engage in honest, frank, open dialogue with the government of Zimbabwe and encourage them to implement those economic and political reforms that they've committed to, encourage them to uphold people's human rights, which is what they said they would do. So we want to sustain that dialogue. I think it's really important that we can continue to talk. And above all, we continue to stand by Zimbabwe's people. Over the last 10 years, we've provided about $1 billion in aid to this country, helping people with health and education and water, of course, most recently fighting COVID, helping them uphold their human rights. And we will continue to provide that support to the country. And we will continue to trade with Zimbabwe. We had about $300 million worth of trade with Zimbabwe last year. We have $1.9 million worth of UK investment here in the country. And these targeted sanctions do nothing to affect that aid relationship, that trade and investment relationship. And we sincerely hope that they won't affect our ability to have honest and frank dialogue with the government of Zimbabwe. So no, it's not a rupture, it's not shutting the door. It's just a clear signal that when human rights have been abused, there should be accountability for those abuses in line with what the government committed to do.
Accountability indeed. Melanie, what do you say if I push back and say the buck stops with Emmerson Mnangagwa going for these 4 messengers, as it were, who take instructions from the president? Why not go to where the buck stops, the man who's supposed to be responsible for sending out those instructions to the military and to the police? Explain that to us.
Well, Trevor, we look at the evidence in front of us and we look at the individuals that were at the head of the organizations that were responsible for that violence. You know, Owen Ncube was state security minister, Godwin Matanga, the head of the ZRP, Sanyatwe, Antelem Sanyatwe was head of the tactical commander at the time that the August violence happened. that the January violence happened, and Isaac Moyo, the Director General of the CIO. So those were the individuals who have to be responsible for the actions that their organizations take. And as I say, those actions were found to be disproportionate and excessive. And I would say the shutting down of the internet, which Owen Lube and Isaac Moyo were found to be responsible for, was also found illegal. Those are the people who have to take that responsibility for their actions.
Mm. What do you say, Melanie, to people who say that there's a tendency for sanctions to provide cover for the hardliners and the corrupt in ZANU-PF, that they take advantage of the cover for the cover that's provided by sanctions to continue with corrupt activities and use the excuse of sanctions for whatever they're doing. And in particular, as recent as 2 days ago, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Walter Mzembi, actually came out with that kind of view to say instead of imposing the sanctions, the UK ought to be exploiting other avenues to make progress as far as Zimbabwe is concerned. What's your response to that?
Well, Trevor, I would say instead of blaming sanctions for the economic problems in Zimbabwe, I would love to see the Zimbabwean government take responsibility for all the economic problems in the country, for the real suffering that we're seeing amongst ordinary people here. Because it is impossible to me that these targeted measures, these measures which mean you can't open a bank account and keep money there and you can't travel to the UK on 4 individuals, it's beyond credibility to say that those could be affecting the wider economy and wider Zimbabweans. So I would love to see people taking responsibility and recognizing that if you run the economy in this way, where you don't even have a market exchange rate for your money, if you allow the billions that we know are lost in corruption from Zimbabwe to continue, then it's going to be very hard to take the country forward. And those who are involved in corrupt and illicit activities, they can't blame sanctions. Those are their choices to take gold out of the country in the way that they do, to deal in fuel or money in the way that they do. And hiding behind targeted measures of travel bans and asset freezes on 4 individuals is beyond belief. And I do think that there is an increasing understanding and awareness amongst Zimbabwean people that it's economic mismanagement and corruption that are causing the problems in Zimbabwe.
So the sanctions will most likely bite on the 2 individuals. The UK would have sent a message, but are sanctions effective in the long term in terms of what you're trying to do?
Well, I do believe that sanctions send a clear message that you cannot commit human rights violations that have been underlined by independent commissions and have no accountability. I think that, all countries of the world, we've signed up to certain standards under the UN. Zimbabwe itself, in its own constitution, has got a quite amazing Bill of Rights. And I think that it's right that that line is drawn and that people know that that impunity will not be there. So in that sense, I think it really does have an impact and that people will pause and think, and it sends a signal. But I also hope it sends a signal that if you can get onto a pathway, a better pathway of upholding human rights and implementing those reforms, then those sanctions could be removed into the future and to encourage that pathway to go forwards.
I'll go back to the issue that I did ask you. You answered in a way. Lancaster House, facilitated by the British, was significant in terms of getting Zimbabwe's independence. That is the UK acting as a peace broker. Don't you think this removes that opportunity of the UK to act as a peace broker within the context of calls for dialogue and between the ruling party and the opposition? Do you think you'll still be able to play a role of a peace broker in this environment?
Well, I do think that call for dialogue and those efforts to bring dialogue about, those have to be Zimbabwean efforts. At the end of the day, no one welcomes an external coming in to do that. And so that has to come from within Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwean actors have to be willing and able and ready to do that and driving that forward. Now, if Zimbabweans wanted to ask the UK to play a role in that, we would be absolutely ready to do that. I'm sure that there are others in the region who would have an appropriate role as well. But it's for Zimbabweans to decide if, by us saying we stand by the human rights of Zimbabwean people, that should take us out of a conversation about the future for Zimbabwe. That's up to Zimbabweans to decide, but we would be ready.
What are you, changing the text slightly, Melanie, what are you hearing from UK investors about what they consider to be obstacles to investing in Zimbabwe?
Well, it's a good question, because it is one of my jobs to try to encourage UK investors to come to Zimbabwe. And as I say, in terms of the stock of investment, the UK has actually been the biggest investor in Zimbabwe over time. I should say very clearly, the one thing that they absolutely never mention is targeted sanctions. It has no bearing at all on their decisions, at all. There are three things, actually, I would say, three plus one, that they always mention. The first is the problems with the money, to be able to repatriate their profits, to know that they can access dollars, to know that they can exchange dollars into Zim dollars. The fact that there are two exchange rates and there is such a gap between them that you don't know when you can get dollars, you may have to wait 6 weeks. All of this makes it an incredibly difficult environment for businesses to work in. Secondly, they do worry about property rights. And we have businesses, British businesses here in Zimbabwe, that unfortunately still to this day struggle to uphold their property rights. It might be a mine, for example, where they've got miners on their property and they're not able to properly deal with that. Or it might be the uncertainty that to this day, unfortunately, there still are compulsory moves on land. So that second piece is a fundamental certainty that investors need. And that's not to own the property, but to be able to lease the property and have some certainty in the legal standing of that lease. And finally, the rule of law, because even if you can get a ruling that a certain money should be paid back or a certain lease should be respected, that is often not upheld. And so people, again, can't have the certainty to do business. And so we have had businesses come and look at agricultural investments. We've tried to attract more mining investments. We are looking at renewable energy, but getting people to choose Zimbabwe in a global market where they could choose to go to any of Zimbabwe's neighbors. Capital is fickle. It will go wherever the investment opportunities are the best. And until Zimbabwe can sort out those really essential business environment issues, that money will go elsewhere. And I said it's 3 plus 1. The plus one is corruption. It's corruption. You might think that you're coming here and you're going to bid on a contract, or you're going to come and supply energy, and you think you're going through a reasonable process, and suddenly something else happens, and a bidder that wasn't even in the process gets the contract, or you thought you had a financial arrangement that then gets undercut. And that level of corruption and illicit finance makes it a very unstable and very difficult, very expensive environment for people to work in. British companies are not allowed by British law to engage in any bribery or corruption. So it's not a level playing field for them. And again, they will go somewhere where they can do honest, good business.
2 months before Zimbabwe's elections, and I think it was during Davos in 2018, there was optimism that Zimbabwe would be able to rejoin the Commonwealth. December 2019, you came out pretty strongly and said that issue would remain in abeyance for a very long time. It would not happen too soon. Where are we as far as Zimbabwe's readmission to the Commonwealth is concerned?
Well, you're right to say that there was some optimism. And actually, I think even if we go beyond Davos, the UK hosted the Commonwealth heads of government in the summer following that. And Honourable Minister S.B. Moyo was at the time invited, not to the heads of government session, but to a separate session on the side by then Foreign Minister Boris Johnson. And he was able to meet with other foreign ministers from the Commonwealth to discuss what it would take for Zimbabwe to re-enter the Commonwealth. And now when I look at it, I have to say the first most important point to make is that re-entry or joining the Commonwealth is a decision for all Commonwealth countries. So it's for all countries to decide. So I can only give you a view from the UK. Sure. But from the UK's point of view, what we look at, as other countries do, are the standards, the values, the charter, the Harare Declaration. that sit underneath the Commonwealth, that we all stand by, and that make us a community of countries with common values and common standards. And if a country is to re-enter, they do need to convince the other members of the Commonwealth that they're living up to those standards, living up to those values. And the comment I made last December was to say, at the moment, where we are on human rights, where we are on some of the other key values, I'm afraid I think that Zimbabwe is quite far, from the UK's point of view, from re-entering the Commonwealth. Now, I still hope, as I say, that Zimbabwe goes down that path. I hope it starts to uphold human rights, address the electoral reforms that the Commonwealth called for after the last election, and the other actions that it would need to take to be a Commonwealth member who can stand proud living up to those values. I hope that happens in the future, but we are far from that as of this moment, as the UK sees it.
But let's move on to COVID, which is devastating, humanity. Good news in a way. There's been a fear of vaccine nationalism or vaccine apartheid. It's good to see that Foreign Minister Dominic Raab, did indicate that in the first instance, UK is part of, is one of the donors. And there's good news following the Biden administration coming in that they're going to be part of COVAX. Your foreign minister has also indicated that you will take this issue to the G7 summit. Talk to me about what the thinking is around vaccine availability using the COVAX facility.
It's such an important issue, and I just pause for a minute to say, what a challenging year it's been for the whole world and for many of us as individuals, and the tragedy for so many families, so many individuals affected by COVID-19 really is the challenge of my career so far. And I think, when you ask about the UK's approach, we have been clear from the beginning, as many others have been, that we'll only be safe when everybody's safe. This is a global pandemic. You can't treat this in a nationalistic way. You can't put up your borders and vaccinate your people and hope that the pandemic will go away. We are only as safe as the last country and the last people who are safe. So it's not only morally right to make sure that we have vaccine equality, but it's also in all of our interests. And that has been at the heart of UK thinking right from the beginning. And I am really proud that from the beginning, the UK, whilst tackling this incredibly complex pandemic, was thinking ahead, was investing in vaccine research, and was working with others to set up a coalition to say, look, if we get some vaccines across the world, if some of these vaccines that we're all working so hard on work, we're going to need to have a pot of money that can buy those vaccines, buy the safe and effective ones, and provide them free of charge to the most vulnerable in the poorest countries of the world. So we got together with a bunch of other countries. We put in over $700 million. We all worked with the WHO, who is leading this, as well as Gavi and CEPI, slightly less well-known but amazing vaccine coalitions. And we worked with them to say, let's get this right for the poorest 92 countries. So the great news is that we raised the money. The great news is that the WHO is systematically going through, looking at the different vaccines and seeing which ones are safe and effective. The Pfizer one is already through. AstraZeneca, Oxford AstraZeneca is any minute now, but they have a list of 27 vaccines they're looking at. And those vaccines, when they're ready, will be made available to those poorest countries. And we just had an announcement only yesterday that Zimbabwe has been allocated 1.1 million vaccines for the first slug of vaccines through before July. And if Zimbabwe can finish its process, finish its paperwork to be fully signed up and applying, then those vaccines can come free of charge to the most vulnerable Zimbabweans. And that is really good news for the world and for Zimbabwe.
I hear you saying there's outstanding papers to be signed for the 1.1 million doses to come through. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, I'm confident that this is underway. And when I saw the Vice President and Minister of Health just before Christmas, we talked about COVAX. He said that there was a high level of commitment from the Zimbabwean government, that they were working on the elements they needed to have in place. So I'm very confident that Zimbabwe will be there. And I sincerely hope Zimbabwe is, because as you can imagine, there's high level of competition, not just for vaccines, but for these free vaccines that come with help around the cold chain and actually making sure they get to the people who need them. So as the ambassador to Zimbabwe, I sincerely hope Zimbabwe doesn't lose its place in the queue. I want to see the most vulnerable Zimbabweans getting those vaccines as soon as possible.
You under your charge, whilst you were, let me rephrase that, you have overseen the disbursement of assistance to families who are considered to be extremely vulnerable, 413,000 vulnerable families, 100,000 people living in urban areas, and more such assistance has been made available to Zimbabweans. Speak to me about that, because that's a positive story in a relationship that is not that pretty at times. Talk to me about that.
Yes, thank you, Trevor. I think a lot of the work we do on the development side perhaps goes a little unnoticed, and thank you for highlighting just two areas. As I said before, over the last 10 years, we provided over $1 billion, and that, in real terms, those are the individuals that you just talked about that have received cash support from the UK, but it's also 7 million textbooks, it's 2.6 million people with clean water, it's 1.8 million women and children with improved nutrition, it's kids being able to stay in school, it's the full range of effort that we've been able to make. But you asked me specifically about the cash, and let me just talk about that. One of the things we started piloting, if you like, just doing it at a small scale a few years ago, was providing cash transfers, a small amount of cash to the poorest urban households. And that was because we recognized that this extreme poverty and vulnerability wasn't just in rural Zimbabwe. There were people living in Zimbabwe's cities who sometimes struggled to have 2 meals a day. And I've got a development background. The evidence is fantastic that if you give people cash, it's a far more effective way to help them make choices about how they feed their families and how they support their livelihoods than if you give them food. So we gave them cash, and this turned out to be a timely bit of work, because when COVID hit, we all know that it's people in the urban areas who've suffered the most. It's the informal traders. It's those who rely on being able to move around, to be able to sell in markets. And they've been really badly hit by COVID in terms of their economic well-being. And so we've been able to scale up that money and make sure more people are able to have, 2 meals a day. This is not giving people great wealth. It's just allowing them to get above the lowest level. And I went to visit some of those families in one of the high density areas outside of Harare, and speaking to families about being able to keep their children just having the level of nutrition to keep well. It reminds you that this is life-saving. And, I would love to see the government of Zimbabwe have the sort of safety net, social safety net, that stopped people from dropping below the level that is unbearable for them. And of course, we did see announcements and a small amount of money go out this year, but I would like to see something more systematic, more meaningful. And we've been providing advice and support to the government on how it could do that into the future.
Is this the kind of advice that gets embraced? Because this is a specialty area for you. Are you being listened to as far as that is concerned?
Well, it's hit and miss. Every so often, you find brilliant technical people. And this, I've worked with governments all over Africa, and the level of technical expertise and capability of the civil servants that we work with is outstanding. So we find that we work with some brilliant civil servants. They understand the evidence, they look at the data, they're interested in the practical experience on the ground, and they want to do something. So we can find places where we can really work together and really make progress. We don't put any of our money through the Zimbabwe government because of the challenges around corruption and where that money goes, but we can work together as technical partners. What we often find is when it gets to the more political level, the level of commitment to putting resources towards the greatest needs of people and doing that in a way that's grounded in the science and the evidence, that is not there to the extent we would like to see. If you take the agriculture sector, for example, it's well known that the subsidies that are provided by the government are a very, very inefficient way to get the agricultural economy going in Zimbabwe, and far too much of it goes to wealthy farmers. It's not repaid. Being politically connected helps you. And that's not the way to look after the needs of your average Zimbabwean. And so we've done research, we've done a lot of work. Some of that has been picked up and brought into the government work, and we have seen some improvements. We'd like to see more of it picked up, of course, and where the evidence is there. This is not about countries or kind of imposing ideas. As I say, I'm a development professional. There's facts, there's evidence of what works, and there are things that don't work. And we could just be very plain and simple about it and do more of the things that work.
You just brought me to a contentious point around development assistance. You'll be familiar with Dambisa Moyo's work, which became, a narrative for some time, which is that aid doesn't work. There are other ways of helping Africa climb the ladder of development. What's your response to that?
Well, I'm a big supporter, and the UK government certainly takes the approach that, yes, you have to support the country itself to climb that mountain itself. The old adage of give a man a fish and he's fed today, give a woman a fishing rod and teach her to fish and her family's fed for the future. And of course, working with Zimbabwe, working with Zimbabweans on that journey, building the long-term change, the right policies, the right institutions, channeling the money in the right ways. Of course, that is the right approach. But when I think of aid or development, it's all about providing that technical assistance, that advice, trying to work in partnership, harder in some countries than others, but doing that wherever you can, and trying to help create that systemic change. And when I talk to young girls who've been on bursaries, working with partners like CAMFED that we work with, who've been able to stay in school and avoid early child marriage because of the support they've had, and the difference that makes their life chances, that they will go on to have their children later, for their children to be healthier and better educated, for them to have jobs that bring income into their family. That changed your life. It's very hard to say that that doesn't work. And if you can make the policy and the systems work so that's possible for every girl, now that's development.
I'm going to go back to the sanctions again. As I was reading the sanctions press release on your website, it says the first as part of this sanctions regime. Are we to expect more sanctions?
Well, we always keep sanctions under review. We have these targeted sanctions in a range of countries, and we're driven by the evidence of what happens on the ground and the objectives of that particular sanctions regime. And the objective of the regime in Zimbabwe is to encourage the respect for human rights, democracy, space for civil society, and the rule of law. So that is always kept under review.
Right. I'm not going to let you go without abusing you to sell Zimbabwe to the world. Before COVID, I take it, Melanie, you traveled, you sampled our tourist destinations. What has made an impression on you? What destinations have made an impression on you that you would want to recommend to people should COVID give us an opportunity to travel again?
Well, when people can travel again, they absolutely must come to Zimbabwe. First and foremost, of course, I travel for work, but in traveling for work, I went to Bulawayo, the most beautiful town set close to the Matopos, which are absolutely stunning, with wonderful people and stunning buildings. I've been to Mash Central, perhaps not a tourist destination, but I met fantastic people there. I've been to Mashvingo. So with work, I've traveled around. But you're right, Trevor, before COVID, I also took advantage of having some time off and visiting, again, having visited them first in 1995, some of Zimbabwe's most beautiful places. And of course, there's the well-known ones. Victoria Falls is globally knockout amazing. And so are the national parks, Mana, Chilo. But I want to do a plug for Chimanimani because it's perhaps a little less famous, but I first went there in 1995. It was stunning then with its beautiful mountains and rivers and streams. And it's got a particular place in my heart because I went back there after Cyclone Idai for work. And, the talking to people and seeing what they'd had to go through really, really broke my heart. But I was back again this year. And although there's still more to do, the resilience of people, the way they pick themselves up and rebuilt their livelihoods, it's quite amazing. So I'd give a plug for Chimani Mani, amazing people and just a absolutely stunning scenery.
Mm. You know, when we started, Melana said, when I looked at your CV, when you appointed, I said, this is the woman who's going to come and fix Zimbabwe. That is within the context of the set of skills that you have within developmental assistance space, your work at the World Bank, your passion for climate change. And the world is talking about building back better. Within the portfolio of the projects that you're working on in Zimbabwe, is that a theme that you're pursuing? And if you are, what kind of projects are you looking at?
That's absolutely a theme. And thank you for mentioning climate change, because it's been one of the other anchors to my career. And I think just to pause on that for a minute, this year, when we see how COVID, how a pandemic, something natural can make humans feel very small and powerless, it's a reminder. It's a reminder that we aren't all powerful. We need to take care. We need to look at these global challenges and do something about them. And unless we address climate change as a world, and we can only address it as a world, we're going to face serious problems in the future. And this year, I'm really excited that the UK is hosting COP26, which is when the whole world comes together to try and tackle climate change. And it's been said that this really is a critical and in some ways final chance for us to get this right. So there is a huge burden on the shoulders of the UK, an excitement about the leadership role we can play, and a desire to really get this right. So that's just taking the global view, and Build Back Better. I'm sure it's one of the greatest hits of this year. We'll hear it time and time again. But bringing it down to Zimbabwe, I have to go back to, at the end of the day, the crux for Zimbabwe of the direction it will take and the way it builds back is going to be, at its core, those core reforms. The government has to implement the reforms it's committed to if the economy is to have those structural foundations to be able to attract investment, for people to have productive jobs. Those reforms come first and foremost, because everything else, you're just building on a very shaky foundation. And similarly, the political reforms, so that people really can feel that they're being able to uphold their constitutional rights. But having said that, and that those are the game changers. Yeah. Those are the game changers for the future of Zimbabwe that I can't do anything about. I can just encourage and support and provide technical advice. But even given that, there are things that we are doing as the UK, and we've worked for years now with farmers to help them be more resilient to climate change, to grow different crops, small grains, different techniques, so that if it doesn't rain enough or it rains too much, they can still get a good harvest. And that's going to be important beyond COVID, just as it was before. And I also think Zimbabwe's got a fantastic opportunity to build its energy system in a different way to the rest of the world. The UK, unfortunately, when we were industrializing and trying to really ramp up our energy, the technology the world had at the time was coal, a terrible technology, a technology which is now expensive, dirty, and if you invest in it, it's going to give you sunk costs that you will never get back. Zimbabwe has the opportunity. It's got the third highest level of sunshine, radiation in the world. It's the most dammed country in Africa. It has the potential to leave behind dirty, expensive technologies like coal and move to renewable technologies. And I sincerely hope it does that. And the UK is keen to play its role in supporting that.
So I look at you, Melanie, your passion for climate change, your connections at the World Bank, international development assistance. Your assignment, I think, was to come and do exactly that. But the political environment derailed you. Do you sometimes have the frustrations that my CV says I ought to be doing this, but the political and real politics has pushed me that way? Speak to me about that.
Well, Trevor, my first degree, before I got to my postgraduate and development and economics, my first degree was history. And I specialized particularly in independence movements on this continent in India. So luckily, I know history is long. There's always a long path. And I learned that the transitions are hard, paths are long. And if you have the right leadership and the right commitment, you can go down that path. So I'm intrinsically a patient person who looks long term. I've also worked on this continent for 2 decades, and I know that transitions are complex and hard. So I didn't come thinking that things would magically turn around. Of course, I hoped that things would go better, move faster, move with more conviction. I still hope for that. And I'm an optimist. So I keep doing what I can, and encourage those whose hands is really in to do everything that they can.
So after all has been said and done, you're still hopeful for Zimbabwe?
I'm always hopeful, and it depends what timeline you ask me under, Trevor, but I'm an optimist.
Wonderful. On that score, Melanie, I love books, as you will have known by now. And the people that watch this show love books. And we're looking forward to seeing what book recommendations you've got for us. Could you recommend 2 or 3 books that you've read that have made an impact that you'd want our global audience to page through?
Well, I have a small confession for you, Trevor, which is that in the last couple of months, instead of reading, whenever I get a spare moment, I listen to podcasts. So I am going to do a recommendation there, because I've been listening to this fantastic BBC podcast called How to Vaccinate the World, and it's genuinely excellent. But having said that, I am a member of a book club, a lovely book club, and the last 2 books that we read, of course, I have to say Tsitsi Dangaremba's latest book, The Mournable Body, a tough read. I discussed it with her. I was lucky enough to talk to her about it. It was not it was not easy to confront some of the issues she wants you to confront, but it was beautifully written. And the other book we read just before Christmas is something called The Vanishing Half, and it's about race and identity in the US, in the South, going back to an earlier period, and really challenging and interesting about race and how people live and embody and perceive themselves in terms of race. So those are the 2 last books I read, and that I thoroughly enjoyed.
Fantastic. Melanie, thank you so much for creating the time during this difficult environment where we are all locked away at home. As you can see, I'm working from my garage at home, trying to make things work. So thank you so much for your time. Allow me, Melanie, if you will, remain seated there for me to address myself to our global audience, to thank you all for making In Conversation the success that it has become. To ensure that you don't miss out on this weekly show, please press onto this red subscribe button and you get a notification every time we have a new show. And as Melanie spoke about podcasts, we do have podcasts. Scroll down and you find a podcast of this show. And don't miss out on that. So until next time, cheers to you all.